So Roosevelt, y'all, he leaves the presidency after 7 years, right? He served 3 years of McKinley, the guy who was assassinated's term, and then he did 4 of his. And he made the mistake of saying, I will not run. I will not seek a third term, because essentially he had done 2 terms. And remember, every president, y'all, up to that point had only served a maximum of 2 terms, starting with George Washington. It was a strong tradition. You don't want to look like you serve more than that, because you might as well be a king if you're going to be around for 12 or 16 years or something. And so he picked a guy he thought would run things okay, his friend, William Howard Taft, okay? And then Roosevelt, feeling comfortable, y'all, he literally leaves and goes off on a safari to Africa, to South America, to Asia. I can't remember where all. And of course, news is spotty then. They don't have the internet and everything like we do today to be able to hear exactly what's going on. But gradually, y'all, he begins to hear some of the things that Taft's doing, breaking up trusts that Teddy thought were, quote, good trusts that had earned that monopoly, so to speak. His fight, Taft's fight with one of Teddy's good friends who was in charge of the forestry department, Gifford Pinchot, and things like that. And so Teddy decides, man, I can't let this happen. I'm going to have to come back. And he announces, I'm throwing my hat in the ring. In other words, I am going to try to run. So what happens is the Republicans, y'all, are faced with a really difficult situation here. They've got, a very popular former president, a semi-popular current president. So who do you pick? Well, it's been tradition, y'all, that if you have a sitting president for your party, you stick with them, right? They're president already. There were some rumbles, in 1980 when Jimmy Carter was running for a second term. Ted Kennedy threatened to run but got nowhere. Ronald Reagan in 1976 tried to intervene against Gerald Ford, who was the sitting Republican president. He didn't get very far. And Teddy, y'all, Teddy will not get very far. And as much as I like Teddy, he really did himself and the nation, I think, a disservice here. Because what he did was, when the Republicans stuck with their current president, the incumbent, that's what you call it, Taft, Teddy stormed out. After all, some people do say he did act like a child sometimes. I don't get to be president again. I'm out of here. Now, if he had just done that, okay, I get it. But he decided, I'm going to create my own political party. I'm going to run against the Republican nominee. And so Teddy creates, y'all, what is known officially as the Progressive Party, right? But in fact, almost everybody else calls it the Bull Moose Party. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a bull moose. When I lived in Canada and when I've been to Alaska, man, we would see them, and they are ginormous, y'all. One was by our car, and he was up above, quite a bit above the car. I'm like, holy, well, anyway, it was impressive. And a bull moose, y'all, man, if you're a hunter, you ain't just going to knock that sucker down with one shot. You got to hit it probably multiple times, or hit it with a really big round. And Teddy was a big hunter. And so he knew how tough a bull moose was. And so Teddy is going to challenge the Republican, and of course the Democrats picked their own candidate, Woodrow Wilson, to run. Woodrow Wilson, former governor of New Jersey, former president of Princeton University, American history, political science scholar, and as we know today, quite a racist as well too. Probably even by kind of some of the standards then, definitely by our standards today. Now, so I'm just going to tell you a story about Teddy here, just to show you how tough this dude was. So Teddy, y'all, is of course going around giving speeches. And he comes out of his hotel, I think it was. He's walking to the convertible that's going to take him to give a speech. A man approaches him with a pistol and shoots Teddy right in the chest. Now, the bullet enters his chest, but it's somewhat slowed down, y'all, because Teddy's speech is folded up in his pocket. And also, Teddy's eyeglass holder, is there. So some of the impact is taken away, but it does penetrate his chest. And you can see the x-ray right here, where you can see, let's see here, darker, more, somewhere, y'all, the bullet is in there. Now, unlike President Garfield, who I talk about in that middle lecture, I don't know if you guys have listened to that one yet. I think it's in the 2C one. Garfield, our president, was shot in 1881, and they tried their best to remove the bullet, and he ended up getting infected, and that's what killed him. He could have lived with the bullet. So Teddy, medical science has kind of grown in the next 30 years. They decide, look, rather than risk his life by taking the bullet out, we're going to go ahead and leave the bullet in there. And for the rest of his life, Teddy walked around with the bullet. Now, I'm not going to say it didn't slow the guy down. It probably cut years off of his life, as the death of his son Quentin in World War I would take years off of his life. He loved Quentin, and seeing his son die in that war was devastating. So Teddy dies probably younger than he should have, and the bullet probably played a role. Ronald Reagan, y'all, in 1981, I was a senior in high school, he was also shot, and he was really never quite the same, Now, I don't know about you guys, but every time I've been shot, first thing I say is, get me to a hospital. I mean, call me weird, but I generally like to go to the hospital. What do you think Teddy said when he got shot besides, ow? He said, get me to the speech. He went and he gave the speech. And he didn't give an abbreviated version of it, y'all. He gave the whole speech. He went all the way through it. He's standing up there. He's bleeding and he's talking to everybody. And he finally finishes, and then he goes to the hospital. And people said, Teddy, are you okay? And he goes, I'm as fit as a bull moose. Because, it takes more than one bullet to bring down a bull moose. And Teddy was a bull moose. And like I said, he still gave the speech while bleeding before getting help. I mean, that is a tough hombre. Would you agree? I mean, man, I wouldn't do that. But, maybe next time. Maybe next time if I get shot, I'll do the same thing. Like, nope, I gotta teach this lesson. Then I will go to the hospital. All right. Now, so I'm not going to do this hide thing here, y'all, because I think the hide thing may have been what caused me to lose some of the picture, thinking back about it now. But the thing is, anytime this happens, that a party splits, except for President Truman in 1948, if you watch that video, it is the kiss of death for your political party's chance at winning the election. I mean, think about it, y'all. If you're running for, say, student president or something, and two of the most popular people run against, maybe a third person who's maybe not as popular, sometimes what might happen is those two will split enough votes away that third person will end up winning. Well, that's essentially what happened. So because the Republicans split in 1912, it virtually guaranteed that Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, is going to become president. And that's exactly what happens. Okay. Now, we didn't talk anything about Woodrow Wilson getting the nomination. There is sort of an interesting story. William Jennings Bryan had tried to be president at least 3 times before. And he wants to try again, like 4 times the charm. And Woodrow Wilson, and particularly Woodrow Wilson's wife, and y'all, Woodrow Wilson's first wife, and his second wife for that matter, are amazing, amazing individuals. First of all, his first wife was a great impressionist artist. She would have been one of the greats in America, but she gave it all up to support her husband's political career. Now, that's sad, but that says something about her love and respect for her husband. And also, when it comes time for William Jennings Bryan, the populist Democrat, to run, she's one of the people that sits down there with them and says, look, you've lost 3 times. Why don't you let my husband try? And you know what? If he gets it, we're going to give you Secretary of State. You're going to get a good job. And so William Jennings Bryan chose not to run. And indeed, Woodrow Wilson wins the presidency. Sadly, the woman has Bright's disease. It's a kidney disease, and she dies during her husband's presidency. But he does find another amazing woman. He had more luck with women than most, well, definitely more than some of my friends did. I've only found one amazing woman in my life, my current wife, right? Some people, he found 2 at least. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So 1912 results. Now, when you look at this, y'all, it is seriously blue, which means seriously Democratic. Now, you guys remember, you win the election by electoral votes. Electoral votes are awarded by state. Now, think about it. You've got Roosevelt getting about half of the Republican votes or more. You've got Taft getting about half the Republican votes. So who's going to end up with a majority? I shouldn't even say a majority, probably a plurality. Now, what is a plurality, y'all? That means you get the most votes, but it doesn't mean you necessarily get the majority, right? A majority is more than half. A plurality is more than anybody else. So by Wilson, y'all, getting the most votes in these states, and sometimes Taft would be ahead in a state as far as a Republican. Sometimes it was Roosevelt. But Wilson, y'all, always pretty much was able to get the votes. Now, if you look here, poor old Taft, y'all. Now, remember, he is the current president. He only wins 2 states. You talk about an embarrassment. Now, in 1980, Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter by quite a bit. And in 1984, Reagan, now president, defeated Mondale, and he got every state except for Mondale's home state of Minnesota and Washington, D.C., right? So, but this is pretty close to that same kind of whoop butt, right? He only gets 2 states here. Roosevelt wins Pennsylvania. He doesn't win his own state in New York, y'all, surprising. Michigan, Minnesota, South Dakota, Washington, and it looks like they split the votes a little bit out here in Calicut, California. Now, the thing is, some people would say, well, Mr. D, what if we just take Roosevelt's electoral votes, right? And we take Taft's electoral votes and we add those together. And it's kind of hard to see on my screen here. But if we take the 88 plus 8, what's his name? Wilson still wins big time. But you can't exactly do that, y'all, because remember, to really figure this out, and we could look it up, but we're not going to do it. AP could maybe give you a little brief thing to show you something like that. But what you would have to do, y'all, is know the vote totals in each state. You would have to say, all right, how many votes did Taft get? All right, how many votes did Roosevelt get? Now, we can assume that had the other not been running, they probably still would have voted for the Republican. People tend to vote along party lines. And then we could see, all right, how many states would the Republicans have won versus that? And I think almost everybody would agree that Roosevelt or whoever the Republican would have won. Maybe even Taft would have won. And if we add the popular votes together here, y'all, Roosevelt, the progressive bull moose candidate, and Taft, the Republican nominee, they got about 7.5 million total votes against Woodrow Wilson's 6.3 million votes. So I think it's clear that probably the Republicans would have won, as they had won pretty much every presidential election, y'all, since 1860. There were 2 exceptions. Grover Cleveland, y'all, is both our 22nd and our 24th president when he got elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. Other than that, Democrats, y'all, did not win a single election between 1860 and 1912. That's a lot of years. People lived, saw sunsets glow, loved, were loved, and died before, a Democrat really got elected. And it only happened, y'all, by sort of this split. So remember that. And then Republicans are going to come to power again until 1928. From 1920 to 1928, you're going to have Republicans in power. Till 32, you're going to have Republicans in control. And then Democrats are going to have a long, 18 years of power. So anyway, y'all, it is just kind of interesting. Now, did I answer all the questions on there, Crystal? Because you're always the one that keeps me online. Did I? If not, let me know. Okay, yeah. All right. No, I appreciate that. I really do, because I write those questions, days before, and then I do the presentation, and I'm like, did I remember to bring up all the stuff I was going to talk about in there? All right, so let's look at Woodrow Wilson. Now, we didn't talk a whole lot about policies during the 1870s and 1880s, 1890s. I can just say a couple of things about those, right? They agreed on almost everything. I hate to say it, but people pretty much voted because mom and dad had voted Republican, they voted Republican. Mom and dad had voted Democrat, they did. There wasn't really much difference between the politicians of the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. But there is one, and it was the tariff. Now, Democrats almost always, y'all, in those days wanted tariffs to go down. Democrat, D, tariff, down, D, right? Democrat down, tariff, D. You can remember that, right? Whereas Republicans wanted to raise Republican, raise the tariff. So what's up with this? Why? What's the idea? Well, Republicans, y'all, tended to be, and some people would still argue, they tended to be supported more by business people, right? By corporations. Now, businesses did not want the foreign competition. So if you have high tariffs, that means American companies aren't going to have to worry as much about foreign competition. Now, you could also make a case and say it also protects American jobs as well, too, which ultimately, when these policies flipped, y'all, because they flip like so many things in the Republicans and Democrats, y'all, later it's going to be Republicans who want to lower the tariff, and then Democrats, and then of course Trump comes in and he wants to raise them up again, but it's just weird. So what happened, y'all, is in these days they wanted to protect American jobs. Now, the Democrats, on the other hand, they were like, hey, if we have high tariffs, that means anytime an American buys something that's from another country, he's paying a higher price because you have to pay the price of the good, plus you have to pay at least some of that tariff, the additional charge. You know, somebody brings in something for $100, you slap $10 on it. That means if I want to make a profit on it, I'm going to have to sell it for at least $110. So Democrats wanted tariffs to go down. So, you know, not much action had happened on tariffs, and it's not the sexiest thing to talk about, trust me. But Democrats wanted to lower the tariff to help Americans because the tariff had gotten pretty high with McKinley's tariff and some of those things. So Woodrow Wilson enacts what's called the Underwood tariff, and it's a pretty serious drop in tariffs, y'all. But there's a problem there, right? Sure, that's good for the American consumer. You cut tariffs. That means they're going to pay less. But this is the other thing, y'all. At this point in our history, we do not have an income tax. How did we pay for the stuff government used to do? By the tariff, by the tax on stuff coming in. So if you're going to cut that tariff way down, how the heck is Wilson going to have to pay? How is he going to be able to pay for the stuff he wants to do as president? So guess what? Less tariff money meant we needed, guess what? A new amendment to the Constitution. And it's an amendment a lot of us cuss, y'all. You guys that are working, because I know some of you out there work at night or in the afternoons. You know, I'll never forget that first week, my first paycheck, right? I was getting paid well, y'all. I was getting paid almost $12 an hour. And this was back in the 80s because I was driving trucks and it was a union job. And so I'd work 40 hours that first week. 40 times 12, what is that? 480. Anyway, it's like a lot of money, like $500 or something. Okay, I can't do my math very well. And so I get my first check and I'm like, $500 coming my way. Awesome. And then I start looking and I see all these deductions on. I'm like, where'd my money go? Well, where did it go? It went to taxes, right? It also, some of it went to my union for a pension, but it went to taxes. It went to pay Social Security. It went to pay that. And those of you that work, you know what that's like. In your mind, you imagine you're taking home X amount of money. But in reality, you know, you're taking something else. Why is that? Taxes, right? We have to pay for government, contrary to what some people think. If we just print it or borrow it, we don't ever have to pay for it. So this is going to create what has come down in history to be called the progressive income tax. Some people think it's called progressive because it goes up and it gets higher and higher the more money you make. It's called progressive as far as I know because it comes out during the progressive time. It really is what we call a graduated income tax. So the way that works, y'all, is let's say my first $100,000 I make, I pay 10%. Now, I pay 10%, everybody else pays 10% for that first $100,000. But then when I make that $100,000 and one, that extra $1, y'all, will be taxed at 20%. Now I'm still paying 10% for the first 100,000. Now let's say I make $200,000, my first 100,000, 10%, my second $100,000 at 20%. We have various brackets. I'm not saying that's what the taxes are. They could be more, they could be less. But anyway, we have various brackets. So why is that? Why do we tax the wealthy more? Well, there's a couple things that people cite for this. For one thing, they can pay it, right? You tax me at the same rate as somebody else. I mean, I'm not gonna be able to pay for my electricity, my water and stuff. Somebody else, they're gonna be able to do it because higher taxes, taxes have a disproportionate effect on the poor. So the idea is if they're wealthy, they can pay more. Some people, y'all, also say, well, if they're wealthy, they have benefited more from this country and the country's government, therefore they owe more, right? And then other people go after people that make more money by saying, look, we need to redistribute income. It's sort of the Robin Hood thing, right? Take from the rich, give to the poor. And so you have that. But at the same time, always remember, this is sort of a fine line. If you tax people too much, and Britain kind of discovered this, if you tax the wealthy too much, ultimately people are going to change their behavior. Why should I work so hard? Why should I start a company? Why should I do this if you're just going to take it all away, right? So there is this, and in economics, you guys will learn about this, there is this sort of fine line that you need to kind of judge. Wealthy people aren't just going to keep making wealth if they know it's all going to be taken away. They're going to find ways to shelter it. They're going to send it to other countries or whatever. And, governments need to remember that, right? So another thing Woodrow Wilson passes that you guys still have to this day is called the Federal Reserve. It created the Federal Reserve Board. Now it was sort of like the old Bank of the United States that Hamilton had created and Andrew Jackson had killed. But to make people happier, y'all, we had multiple people sort of in charge. We also split it up all around the country, okay? And so it wasn't seen as much of a threat, but it had a really important role, and it still does. You guys may or may not know how important what the Fed, because that's the nickname we give it, how important it really is to you guys in your life. For one thing, y'all, how much interest you and I are paying in a lot of ways is directly due to these guys and gals. And it is a woman, by the way, in charge of the Fed, Janet Yellen, first woman ever to be in charge of the Federal Reserve Board. But anyway, what happens, y'all, is they are basically the banker's bank. When banks need money, they come to the Fed, and the Fed gives them loans with a certain percent on it. Now, obviously, if the Fed says, ooh, you know what? We're going to have to raise our interest because, because of inflation. Well, if the bank is loan money at a higher interest, what's it going to do? It's going to charge you and me at a higher interest. Now, you guys are living through an amazing period with incredibly low interest rates. You want to buy a house, you guys want to buy a car, you want to get a loan for college or whatever, loans are ridiculously low. But y'all, if we start getting inflation, which some people are predicting because of all the money being thrown at the economy right now by the government, if inflation starts to happen, banks aren't going to sit around and loan you $100,000 and charge you 2, 3, 4, 5% interest or something on it. And then if inflation is 10%, 20%, and when you pay it back, you're paying it back with dollars that can't buy as much, even with interest, as they did when they loaned it. In other words, the bank is taking the hit. They loaned you $100,000 when it bought $100,000 worth of stuff. But when you paid it back, that $100,000, maybe you paid back $120,000, maybe it only bought $75,000 worth of stuff. So when inflation rates go up, y'all, interest rates will go up. Now, there's another way, too, that the Fed helps control the money supply. Now, money, you guys know, is what determines its value. If there's too much money out there, too many paper dollars and coins floating around, too much money in people's bank accounts, you're going to have inflation because money is worth a little bit less. So what the Fed will do, y'all, is sometimes pull money in to basically take money out of the money supply, or when it feels like we need some money, it will do that. And it does this by what's called open market operations. I know this gets complicated, but basically they sell securities or they buy securities. And so this has a big impact on your life, y'all. Whether you guys will be able to afford a house or a car has a lot to do with what the Fed decides the interest rates are going to be. Woodrow Wilson also passed the Clayton Antitrust Act. Now, way back, y'all, in 1886, we had created the Interstate Commerce Commission to try to regulate some of the railroads. It didn't have much teeth in it. In 1890, we passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was supposed to break up big corporations. Once again, not much teeth in it. What does that mean? Really no power, really no threat. In fact, remember, y'all, they had used the Sherman Antitrust Act against unions. And the Clayton Act that Woodrow Wilson passed, Democrats are generally more favorable towards unions, y'all, and enjoy, therefore, union support more than Republicans. And that's one thing that really hasn't changed much. But the thing is, the Sherman Antitrust Act, made it illegal to have these interlocking directories where it didn't look like it was a trust, but it was really a trust because the same people, y'all, were in all these different board of directors. So the same handful of people, y'all, controlled a bunch of companies, even it looked like the companies were separate. It made that illegal, but more importantly, labor unions could not be considered a trust. I mean, when you think about it, they are kind of a trust because what are you saying? Workers and myself, we will not work for you unless you pay us a certain amount of money. You're essentially saying, you can't hire us individually. You're limiting supply of labor. So I could see the argument legally, but of course it didn't do much for workers. So it gets rid of that idea. So these are some of the things that Wilson does, y'all. Now, the big thing for Wilson for a lot of us today is what was up with women's suffrage. Now, I've already mentioned that Wilson had a couple of amazing women in his life. He had another one too, if you know what I mean, but I'm not going to talk about that one. But anyway, y'all, he had a couple of amazing wives. And you would have thought he would have been maybe more open to letting women be able to vote. But initially, he was very negative. But what changes his mind, y'all, is when World War I comes along, women, as you guys will see in the lecture coming up a couple days from now, women served amazingly heroic. They took the jobs of men in the factory so men could go fight overseas. And this really impressed him. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm afraid if I do that, you're going to lose the PowerPoint. So, yeah, what I'll do is I'll just pull it out of this here. And what it says here, Wilson initially did not support women's suffrage, though he changed mind due to their service in World War I. Yeah, I'm just afraid that bar, when I do not when I click stop sharing, which obviously stops the sharing, but even when I click hide, I think that's what messed it up. During my conference period, next period, y'all, I'm going to go ahead and set up my other computer so I can see what you're doing. I made the mistake of not doing that by taking my computer home over the holidays with the mistaken idea I'd actually grade some papers, but there you go. All right, so did you get it all, Crystal? Awesome. All right, so speaking of which, let's go talk about the ladies and reform, okay? Now, women, as we've said, y'all, played a big, big role in the progressive era, and a lot of them were single women, or they were Quaker women, or particularly Mormon women. It's sort of interesting that, these particular religions, Quakers and Mormons, really gave us a lot of your most progressive-minded women who had the most time to work in reform movements. Obviously, they're very interested in banning alcohol, the temperance movement. They're interested in settlement houses like Jane Addams and Florence Kelly's settlement houses that we've mentioned. A lot of women just form clubs, right? Only women in these clubs. And of course, that women would get together and meet, and of course, pretty soon start discussing like, hey, we really don't have the same rights as men. And hey, one of the most important rights would be the right to vote. Now, they weren't starting out radical. They weren't like tearing down buildings and burning things, but they were starting to talk about it. And they wanted change to come, okay? So you have them doing that. And of course, a lot of them supported dry laws, making states ban alcohol. So this had been a lot of the things they were concerned about. And remember, y'all, women had been the foremost leaders in the abolitionist movement in the 1830s and 40s and 50s, right? You think of Harriet Beecher Stowe, right? Uncle Tom's Cabin, but you also think of the Grimke sisters and these other women who played such a big role in that, y'all. I mean, it's interesting to posit reasons why and all that. But of course, the biggie would be suffrage. Obviously, if they could vote, they could do a lot more. Now, one of the claims that had been being made was that, well, if women could vote, they would cease to be, quote, women, to do what women are supposed to do, this separate sphere, this sort of cult of domesticity, you know, being a wife, staying home, having children, teaching the children, you know, Republican virtues and those kind of things. All of that, it was believed, would come to an end. And some suffragists, or I should say suffragettes, I guess, argued that no, the separate spheres would not be changed. All right. And of course, obviously, the temperance movement favored suffrage because they could get the right for women to vote more quickly. I mean, they could get the right to ban alcohol, obviously, if they could vote. Otherwise, they had to basically try to convince men to change their minds. Now, Alice Paul here. Alice Paul is a remarkable woman. I've seen her tombstone. It's fairly small, surprisingly, for a woman who did so much. And she lived, I think, until the 1970s. But she's going to change the tactics quite a bit. Whereas a lot of women had gone what I kind of call the Booker T. Washington method, which is let's just kind of quietly work for change. Let's sort of prove ourselves, and we'll be given the respect and the equality and the vote in time. There were women, mainly a lot of the early ones had kind of gone that route. Well, Alice Paul's a little bit more impatient. For one thing, she lived in England, and she'd seen some of the what we would call wild tactics. That's what people called them. Maybe the distractors did, or detractors did, of really doing things to get attention, to kind of, quote, wake men up, kind of thing. And so this might be parades, but other things to sort of shock and to demonstrate and to protest, go in and interrupt a meeting of men to do this. And you guys see this today, kind of guerrilla warfare, but politics, guerrilla politics in a certain way. So she kind of pioneers some of that in America. And anyway, she's going to use these tactics. And this horrified a lot of the women, y'all, kind of like what W.E.B. Du Bois was suggesting, horrified people like Booker T. Washington, okay? So anyway, she's also the author of the Equal Rights Amendment, which basically says that women should enjoy all of the rights of men. And this is going to kind of fade away, but in the 1980s, it comes back. And they give it an extension in Washington, hoping that it will pass. And I think it's within 3 votes of it passing. In other words, 3 states, I should say. They got enough states to ratify it in the state, and it would have gone in effect for all the states, but they were like 3 states short, and time eventually ran out on it. So even to this day, we don't exactly have this. And we'll look, when we look at the 80s and the 70s and the conservative resurgence, we're going to look at the arguments about the Equal Rights Amendment, and it's something that's still out there and being discussed today. Now, one of the sort of more outrageous things, it may not seem that outrageous to us today, was the picketing of the White House. Now, here you're seeing a clip from a movie called Iron Jawed Angels. That's Hilary Swank playing Alice Paul. And of course, this gets a lot of media attention, right? Gets their cause on the front pages of everybody's newspapers. I'll show you the pictures of the real one here in a little bit. The National Women's Party will station sentinels at the White House gate from dawn until dusk every day until the Constitution of the United States is amended to ensure that every citizen, regardless of sex, is entitled to vote for the man who occupies or woman who occupies that house. Give that good boy an extra cookie. Now there's President Wilson. He liked his hop hats.
And within their legal rights. They'll get tired of the cold. It won't last.
They'll get tired of the cold. It won't last. through snow, through rain. 18 months,
How about
y'all.
their trespassing? On public property? Oh, yeah.
Although, of course, we've done that today, right? Yeah.
The avenue is misty gray, and here, beside the guarded gate, we hold our golden, blowing flags and wait.
So once again, this is from the movie Iron Jawed Angels. You can probably find it. I think it was on HBO. I ended up somehow with 2 copies, so I gave one to the school and kept one for myself. But here you see the picture, the real ladies out there, right? Standing there. Mr. President, how long must we wait? Mr. President, what will you do for women's suffrage? And ultimately, he would do quite a bit, but initially, not very much. And you see these women here, y'all, with the signs on saying, or the little sashes, I guess is what you call those things, what colleges they were from. These were college-educated ladies, University of Kansas, University of Missouri, Leland Stanford, which is now Stanford University, Smith, right? And you see these names, okay? Now, while she was in prison, because eventually they would get arrested for some of their tactics that they used, they chose to go on a hunger strike. Okay, it says went on a hunger strike in jail and was force-fed. Okay, against her will, I guess is what it says. So I'm going to let you see a scene here, and this is disturbing. I understand if you don't want to see it, if you just fast forward through it, I'll get it. But I'm going to let you see the condition in prison and then see the women's choice to stop eating to get attention for their cause, and then what the penalty was for that.
Hunger strike.
Hunger strike. Mr. D needs to go on a hunger strike. Y'all probably agree, right?
I was standing
There's Alice.
by my window on a cold and cloudy day.
What?
When I saw.
All right, so I'm going to take it a little bit further here, and you're going to see them, take them in. And now this was, in the movie, they make it like happen instantly, but she had actually not eaten for some time when they finally made the decision. And down their stomach, y'all. Okay, that's a tough watch. I've seen it too many times, and it's still hard to watch. But those tactics, y'all, did get attention, right? They did begin to change people's minds, but ultimately, a lot of it was due to what women did during World War I, serving in those men's jobs. And as a result, they ended up, President Wilson changed his mind and began to support it. And ironically, y'all, the closest we've had to a woman president at this point will be Woodrow Wilson's wife, because what will happen is his second wife, he will have a stroke and he'll be basically incapacitated for about the last year or so of his presidency. And it's going to be his wife, Edith, who will essentially operate as president, shielding him, probably signing things for him, speaking for him when he probably really couldn't speak or make his opinions known. Maybe though she's not given the official title as president, she essentially did that. So a lot of irony there, right? All right. So the question AP will sometimes ask is, well, were progressives successful? And obviously, you guys might have your opinion. They're still with us today. Some of their ideas and goals have changed, but many Democrats today are proud to call themselves progressives and believe they advocate for progressive causes. So yes and no. It's always that, right? You never like clearly one or the other, or why would they ever ask that question, right? AP only asks questions, y'all, but you can argue a little bit on both sides. They don't want one like, oh, sorry, you said they were successful. They weren't. 0 points. Every question that they give you that's like that, y'all, is open-ended. You can argue either way. You just have to argue with facts, right? And back it up. Now, they are pretty successful at getting child labor abolished in most states. And eventually, Franklin Roosevelt, with the Fair Labor Standards Act of the 1930s, will finally end child labor except for agriculture and entertainment. Women's labor, they do get rid of a lot of that. Now, I think on your notes, I asked this question. Now, this kind of is a double-edged sword in some ways, because some people said, well, this law was passed, banning women from certain jobs to protect them. But then also, that's kind of a slam too. If you're fighting for equality, but then, quote, you're not equal enough to do these jobs, that can be an issue. And also, it could interfere with women's advancement within certain professions. Even relatively recently, and I'm recently to Mr. D is in the last 40 years or so, we had a case, Ledbetter, I think the lady's name was. She was trying to move up the food chain at her phone company job. Well, they said, no, you can't really be doing these jobs. This requires you to stand too long and to pick up weights that are too heavy for a woman to do. And so she was really denied that chance to get that job, which made it harder for her to move up the food chain there. So all I'm saying is you pass these laws, and it's understandable. We want to protect women. We don't want them suffering from a lot of the things that were happening to other workers at the time. But at the same time, it's disturbing because it hurts their chances for advancement. So once again, most things in life, y'all, as you guys have figured out, it's just not one or the other, okay? So child labor there, gone, right? Also, women now, by being able to vote, could participate in politics. Everybody that could vote anyway now got to vote for their state senators or their national senators at the state level, right? You guys will see the 17th Amendment gets passed. Still with us today, that is income tax. The 19th Amendment, women's suffrage, initiative, referendum, recall. I've got reform on here, but it probably should be recall. That didn't pass, as you guys saw, in every state, and we don't have it at the national level, but they did get it in a lot of states. So, you can, each of their accomplishments, you can put a little asterisk by it and say, but, kind of thing. A lot of trusts were broken up, right, which helped give more competition and hopefully a better quality good, because if companies have to compete, they have to make a good, right? They have to make it at an affordable price. But when you're the monopoly, obviously, you don't have to do that when you're a trust. So progressive amendments, the federal income tax. Yeah, you and I may not like that one, especially when we have to pay taxes. But taxes are necessary, y'all, for government to be able to do the things that it does. Governments can't rely completely on just borrowing from other countries that may be very hostile to us and acquire, in my opinion, a certain amount of power over us. Because whenever you owe money to somebody, y'all, you're essentially, I don't want to use the word slave because that's an insult to slaves, but you are very dependent on them. They control you. You're not a free person anymore when you owe and you owe to credit card companies or banks or whatever. In countries, in my opinion, it's the same. And America subsidizes, pays for a lot of its expenses, y'all, by other countries loaning us money. The 17th Amendment, remember, is the direct election of senators. This, of course, the idea was that people would pay more attention. The senators would pay more attention to the people if the people were the ones who got to decide who they would be. When they were selected by the state legislatures, the idea was that they were basically bought and sold by corporations, by the wealthy. Remember that cartoon, The Millionaires Club? There was a picture of the U.S. Senate. That was what they were trying to fight, okay?
Stupid is, stupid does, sir.
Now, the 18th Amendment is one of those things that sounds like a good idea. Many people call it and still call it the noble experiment. It'll be interesting to see our war on drugs, how it is viewed in the future. You know, was it also a noble experiment or what? Now, the thing is, as you guys will see when we talk about the 20s next week, there were some good things that come out of it. For one thing, the amount of drunk driving goes down. It's believed the amount of alcoholism maybe went down, because the fact that something is illegal does convince a lot of people not to do it. Hey, I'd like to do it, but I'm not going to do it because it's illegal. You know, it's how some people think. I don't want to go to jail, or I don't want to do something that's wrong, or might get me fired from my job. So that does have an impact. On the other hand, y'all, people who are addicts or who don't want to follow the law, they're still going to get their alcohol, right? If they have to pay for it a lot, if they have to finance organized crime, and that ultimately, y'all, is the negative that comes out of prohibition, is the fact that more organized crime, which had been, you know, pretty kind of small cookies, small potatoes, whatever you want to say, in some places, really takes off. You start hearing about Al Capone. The mafia, y'all, really, really grows during this time. And because, of course, people need alcohol, these people are going to get me alcohol. I'll pay them 2, 3, 4 times what it is to do so. Also, an interesting thing happens too. More women start drinking, though. So this is kind of an unintended consequence as well, because you had what were called speakeasies. And a speakeasy was a club that you would go to kind of on invitation only, and it wasn't really written on the outside. You would just, there's still one in New York, for example, that I visited. You had to know the exact address. You went there, you knocked on the door, you said a little phrase when they asked who's there, and then you got to go in. Now, they don't do that because it's illegal anymore, just because it's kind of interesting kind of thing to do. And so anyway, you got that, but this is the problem. Men started taking their girlfriends, taking their wives to these speakeasies. And whereas before, alcoholism had really been something mainly in the men's, as a men's problem, because women stayed away unless they were prostitutes. Now we start seeing women going there, and the alcohol they drank, y'all, tended to be stronger. You weren't going to pay these high prices for some bad beer. You were going to pay for hard liquor. So instead of drinking something 3, 4, 5, 6% alcohol, you were drinking stuff, 40%, right? Or more, 50%. And it often tasted really badly, y'all, because it was poorly made. It wasn't aged. And so people started adding flavorings and things to them, and they started calling these cocktails. And so if you guys have ever heard people talk about cocktails, it comes from the prohibition of the 1920s and early 30s, when people were trying to disguise the bad taste of bad alcohol, right? Okay. Now, oops, I forgot another amendment. There's one more. And of course, it's the 19th women's suffrage. And I think that's got to be the greatest accomplishment of the Prohibition era, right? And just like in Reconstruction, African-American male suffrage, African-American citizenship is something that couldn't really be taken away. People could chip away at it, but it couldn't be taken away. Now, why could you say the progressives were ineffective? Well, first of all, they don't do much for civil rights for African Americans anyway, right? Maybe for women, but not for African Americans. That's pretty much ignored during most of the time. You had people like Booker T. Washington, Ida B. Wells fighting lynching, right? Trying to get a federal lynching law, but you don't really see much action there. Jim Crow, segregation still stays in effect in the American South, and African Americans, even though legally African American men can vote, and eventually women, a lot of impediments to that. Also, as I said, prohibition is going to fuel organized crime, and this is going to be seen generally as a failure of prohibition. The eugenics movement, which we've talked about, is a sad stain on American history. It's wrenching to read about, but you should be aware about it. I don't believe in hiding bad things that happen, and it's something that you need to put on the grade, report card of the progressives if you're evaluating them. And the last thing I want to talk about here, y'all, has to do with conservation versus preservation. I've already talked a lot about how Teddy Roosevelt set aside national parks, national monuments like Devil's Tower and other places like that so that future generations could enjoy them. Teddy Roosevelt was an ardent hunter, fisherman, hiker, all those kind of things. I mean, he probably knew nature as well as any American at the time, except for maybe his friend John Muir, who I'll talk about in just a sec. And so he wanted future generations to enjoy this. He didn't want everybody to cut down every tree and build a building on everything cool. So he had the foresight, y'all, which is why he's probably on Mount Rushmore, to set aside places so that you guys could enjoy them. Your grandkids, hopefully, can enjoy these places. Like Yosemite Park, right, would be set aside, or, Glacier Park, and some of these others. Mr. D needs to visit a lot more of these places, y'all. My wife loves nature. I'm kind of an indoor kind of guy, but I'm really starting to kind of open up to seeing some of these parks and enjoying the nature things. And that's something I hope to do in the future. And I wouldn't be able to do that. You guys wouldn't be able to do that without the progressives, and particularly Teddy Roosevelt, setting aside these national parks, okay? Trying to cut back on the overuse of resources. Now, as I've said before, please do understand the distinction here between conservationist and preservationist. Now, conservationists are those that want to conserve. Now, they're not the same as a conservative, right? Conservative is a political thing. Conservationist is a environmentalist thing. Now, conservationists they don't want like stuff to be used for the most part. They want to just keep it like it is. Whereas preservationists shall preserve it, but also use it, but use it in a intelligent way. Don't slaughter every animal, don't cut down every tree. If you are gonna, manage the number of animals, if you're going to cut down trees, you need to be planting trees so that we keep about the same number of them. Otherwise businesses will just go in and cut down everything and not think about the future. I mean, some do, right? There's some companies that are very, very bright and do that. But, they've really kind of been pushed in that way by efforts going from the progressives. So ultimately, y'all, one of the last things you can chalk up to the progressives is, in a lot of ways, the birth of environmentalism, right? Making things safer for us. I can't say they made the air cleaner. They didn't do a whole lot on that, or necessarily the water, but they did begin to preserve, or at least, preserve, these kind of things so that you and I can enjoy them. Now, a name that you guys should know and an organization you guys need to know is John Muir and the club he created, the Sierra Club, which is the foremost environmental club in this nation, still exists to this day, and advocates on behalf of preserving our, nature, so that we can use it and not, damaging nature. John Muir was an early environmentalist who traveled around. Here's a picture of him with Teddy Roosevelt. I think that's Yosemite. Once again, Mr. D hasn't seen these parks like he should. Here's John Muir on the right. Here's Teddy on the left, and they were friends. And Muir definitely influenced the president in these ideas and beliefs. Now, ironically, today, y'all, John Muir is being attacked by his own club, who felt they had to distance him. Apparently, they've discovered, or at least made public, if they knew about them, remarks, and I haven't read them, so I can't say what they're like, but they're purported to be racist. And so you see some people trying to strike him down, remove him from that. As I've said so often, and this is my opinion, be careful of that. That's presentism. When you evaluate everybody by the standards of today instead of by the standards that they lived in at the time. It doesn't mean they don't have things to teach us or whatever. They do. These were very bright people who did a lot of good work, but their opinions may be different than those you and I have today. I don't know about you, but I sure as heck don't want to be judged 100, 200 years in the future by somebody who apparently knows more or somehow is smarter and realizes a lot of the things I believed and you believed and did were wrong, okay? Judge people by their times. It may influence how you like them or not like them, but let's not, go about removing people from history. And that's just my opinion, but I think we're in a dangerous situation for doing that. All right, so that's it, y'all. We have finished progressives. I hope I gave you enough information. If I didn't mention something, don't worry. I won't penalize you on it. Progressives, I spent a lot of time on it, which means, once again, there'll probably not be a single question on the AP test. But if there is, you will know it because we spent ridiculous amount of time on it. I did at least spare you a couple videos. We will be starting World War I tomorrow, going through that with you guys. I look forward to that. As I jokingly say, it's going to be a blast. It's going to be the bomb. I appreciate you guys. I know these things aren't fun to sit and watch at home, but it's kind of the situation we're in. I wish all of you could be in class and I could be seeing your faces and seeing if you understand things, and you guys could be talking and contributing in class. It makes it so much better. This is a compromise, and I appreciate you guys for putting up with it and doing the best you can under the circumstances. All right, see ya. Love y'all. Bye-bye.